Good afternoon, everyone. This is LadyDragon speaking. It's Tuesday, January 21st, 25. It's 1:04 p.m. Now, this is about the GLP-1 innovation. Okay, very interesting. I've been having problem with this. 3 times I have to. I'm trying to live stream this and I can't. So they must be saying something that they don't want you to hear. So let's listen. Hey, ça fait 3 fois que j'essaie de live streamer ce Keynote-là, puis ça marche pas. Fait qu'il y a quelque chose dans cette histoire-là là, qu'ils veulent nous empêcher de savoir. Fait qu'il faut l'écouter, plus que jamais. S'il y a un problème avec le son, marquez-le s'il y a un problème avec le son, marquez-le dans le chat, s'il vous plaît. If you have a sound problem, please put it in the chat, okay? Here we go.
For some insightful and impactful discussions. I will ask before we begin, I know that people are scattered in the audience, few rows available, if we can ask for some your MC for today's storyteller sessions. We have an incredible day of programming with insightful discussions on health innovations, advertising, gaming, artificial intelligence, and much more. Our first session starts right now, featuring health and culture experts discussing how drugs like Ozempic and Wegovy impact lifestyle,
I have a problem.
health, and behaviors.
I'm not restarting this whole thing for a 4th time. Just give me a moment now. I'm gonna try to fix this fucking thing. Un seconde, un problème de son, tabarnak. Je sais pas ce qu'il faut. C'est coller ça dans mon computer. Bon, on va continuer à essayer de voir si ça marche.
Guiding this conversation is going to be Sam Hornsby, CEO and founder of Triptych. Everyone, please welcome Sam to the stage.
Thank you, Eric. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this session. It is so wonderful to see so many of you here to listen into this conversation about what I think is one of the most fascinating topics of our time, the GLP-1 revolution on culture and consumption. It seems like GLP-1s are taking over the world. Even just here in the US, 1 in 8 American adults has taken a GLP-1 medication, and brands like Wegovy and Ozempic have now become household names. You know, Ozempic, Wegovy, GLP-1s represent a quantum leap forward in the treatment of obesity, and that has massive consequences when you consider the fact that 2/5 of the world's population are either overweight or obese. In the US here alone, obesity treatments cost our economy $260 billion a year, and globally that is more than $4 trillion. So, you know, a seismic shift and a massive transformation. But I think what's fascinating about GLP-1s and obesity is that, you know, obesity and treating obesity prevents a cascade of other health conditions and chronic conditions, including diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and even certain forms of cancer. So the impacts and the effects go far beyond weight and weight loss. And actually, you know, while trials are still early, GLP-1 drugs are already showing promising indicators for a whole range of health conditions. They act kind of like a molecular Swiss Army knife, treating things like inflammation, chronic inflammation and blood flow. They are showing really positive indicators for treating addiction in general. And actually, again, while the data is still early and the trials are still early, GLP-1s are already showing really positive indicators for things like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and other neurological degenerative conditions. So clearly, GLP-1s are something of a wonder drug. Truly, probably, perhaps the first trillion-dollar class of drugs. And they really represent one of the biggest health technology breakthroughs of our time and era. People have compared the invention of GLP-1s to the creation of antibiotics or vaccines. And some have even compared GLP-1s in terms of their transformative impact on society and culture to the invention and creation of AI. So clearly we're witnessing a massive transformation for markets, for public health, for sectors and industries across the board, and for culture and consumption, which is what we're going to talk about here today. But look, it's still early days. And with any massive transformation such as this one, there are still many unknowns, many questions that remain to be answered, many different scenarios that could play out, and I think all sorts of quite surprising and unexpected consequences of this transformative shift in markets. So I couldn't be more happy to be joined by my friends here today to talk about GLP-1s, not just in terms of how they're transforming our bodies, but really how GLP-1s are transforming culture, society, and kind of consumption at large. And I really couldn't think of a better group of panelists to join me here today than Sona, a veteran corporate executive in the wellness industry, Jenny, a medical anthropologist and strategic futurist, and Kevin, who is a leader in the content and creator economy and has been doing some fantastic work around storytelling in the GLP-1 space. So if you could all give a warm welcome to my wonderful esteemed panelists this morning. So fantastic. Let's start off with some introductions. We can hear a little bit about you and your role and the work that you're doing. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So hi, my name is Sona Jones. I'm the Chief Health and Wellbeing Officer for the Ymca of Metro Chicago, which is the 5th largest Y association in the world, serving over 300,000 people. I, as Sam mentioned, have spent the last decade plus in the corporate consumer health space. So having held executive roles at Weight Watchers as well as at Athleta, sort of driving a transformation towards a women's well-being brand. And then also served as Chief Marketing Officer for a women's health startup most recently. So thrilled to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. Hi everybody, and my name is Jenny Titsopoulos. I run the Havas medical anthropology practice, which basically means I have the awesome job of studying people beyond the disease state. So what are humans doing and how do they live their lives beyond any given condition? I've also been part of setting up Havas's GLP-1 consultancy, which we'll tell you more about today. And yeah, I wanted to share a fun fact that I'm 5 months into my GLP-1 experience or journey, and I'm about 20 pounds down, but I've stopped counting now. I'm just kind of trusting the process and seeing how my health evolves.
Hi everyone, my name is Kevin Grush and I'm the CEO and founder of a company called Maiden Network. There's kind of two parts to our business. On one side, we're working with top digital talent, traditional talent, to help them build their digital media companies and brands. And on the other side, we work alongside brand partners to develop series programming in the digital space. As Sam mentioned, we are working on storytelling in the GLP-1 space, which we're excited to talk more about today.
Brilliant. Thank you again, and excited to dive into this conversation. So let's get into it. I think a really logical place to start when we're talking about GLP-1s is with their most immediate application, which is around weight health and obesity. So Sona, obviously, as you mentioned in your introduction, you worked across a whole range of companies in the health and wellness space. Can you speak a little bit about how the cultural conversation around weight and weight health has changed during your career? And what do GLP-1s now kind of bring to the party in that conversation?
I mean, I think it says something that even answering that question feels spicy. That's how much the conversation has changed. So I entered the industry kind of as the body positivity movement was taking hold, right? So right as that was starting to crest, and we started to hear phrases like healthy is the new skinny, healthy at any size. Like that was sort of how the cultural conversation was shifting. What happened was sort of like two strains came out of that conversation. One was this kind of backlash against weight measurement or management in general, right? Like I think you had a whole cohort of people who said weight doesn't matter. It really, like, you know, when you look at sort of the science behind BMI, there's a lot of systemic issues with using that number solely, and maybe even took the backlash a little bit too far in that sort of convincing people that like weight doesn't matter at all as it relates to a proxy for longevity or a proxy towards like preventative care as it relates to, you know, chronic condition management. So I think there was like sort of one strand that went there. The other was really focused on this idea that we should no longer be thinking about weight management as it relates to the number on the scale. We should really be thinking about healthy habit adoption, which is a good thing. But what that conversation did was expose this really important question, which is who can afford to be healthy, right? Who is allowed to be healthy? Because when you think about healthy habit adoption or, you know, as it relates to weight management, what you see is that a lot of people, you know, due to wage compression or no access to healthy or nutritious foods, no access to green spaces or sort of safe outdoor spaces to be physically fit, you start to see this huge chasm around who is allowed to be healthy and who isn't. I think what GLP-1s have done and sort of where we are in the conversation right now is we've got multiple truths that are coexisting, right? One is that yes, healthy still is the new skinny, and if that's how you want to think about your approach to sort of weight management, that's great. We're also getting back to a place where it's okay to say that you want to lose weight, which was not something that I think had been okay to say for the last several years, right? But I think the most exciting thing about where we're at is we're having this really nuanced conversation about the science of weight health. And we're able to talk about, as you said, these things on sort of more of a molecular level. And, you know, I shared this story with Sam yesterday, but I was talking to my father-in-law a couple weeks ago, and he's in his mid to late 70s. And I mean, the guy's never been a day overweight in his life. And so we have a fun dynamic. And, you know, he said, well, you know, have you ever thought about like the people that are going on GLP-1s, do you think they've ever even really tried to diet? Have they ever tried to exercise? I like almost flipped a table and I was like, listen, you know, but I was armed with sort of the language to talk about it and say, you know what the science is telling us and what we now know is that for some people, it's not about self-control. It's not about even like healthy habits. Like there's something that has happened at a molecular level that prevents a lot of people from being able to stick to these healthy habits. And I think we can discuss all day long about whether that's because, you know, the foods that we've been eating our entire lives are highly addictive, or whether it's because of, you know, unhealthy diet habits for a couple decades. Like, who knows what it is? But the truth is that the science has changed and we now have these tools to sort of support people better. So kind of, I think, where we are today.
Yeah, fascinating. And I think that anecdote points to the fact, reminds us of the fact that, you know, this is a space when you think about weight health in general, it's rife with stigma.
Yeah.
And users of GLP-1 drugs and technologies are not immune to that cultural stigma and that social stigma at all. And people, as you say, are, you know, often very sort of judgmental of the use of these life-changing drugs. And I think that points to the importance in general of social and cultural context. You know, when we are here at events like CES, the largest tech event in the world, we're talking about GLP-1 drugs because they are a massive technological innovation. But I think I'm really interested in the broader context into which these technologies are introduced and the importance of understanding that context if we're to really kind of capitalize on the opportunity. So Jenny, I wonder if you could speak a little bit to what is the kind of cultural context around the adoption of GLP-1s and why is that important?
So GLP-1s, technologies are a reflection of our times or our society. We're all here to talk about what is society and what are the technologies we need. But when you think about that in an American context, sure, we're a culture of looking good and appearances, but more importantly, Americans are a culture of shortcuts. We want to reach our goals and we want to reach those goals immediately, as seamlessly as possible. And GLP-1s do just that. They promise you the ability to solve complex problems with very little effort, whether that's weight loss management or chronic health conditions. I think what gets really interesting is when we start to shift this conversation away from weight, right? If we simplify the GLP-1 down to what is ultimately the benefit of control, your ability to stop your mind from thinking about something you don't want it to. They're calling that food noise, so if anyone's on a GLP-1, you can attest to the fact that you're no longer being controlled about cravings. Like, I no longer think about food constantly. I will say GLP-1s have not made me a saint. I don't all of a sudden crave carrots. I don't eat a salad every day. I probably still eat like a pad thai each day, but it's a very small portion and then that's all I sustain on. So we're talking about this culture that prioritize hacks or shortcuts, But when we explore that in other markets, we can start to see how that positioning might be completely different. So we were studying Japan. Japan, for example, not currently struggling with obesity, but they have rising rates of overweight and obesity in the market. So GLP-1s for them might be less about weight loss and more about preventative strategies at long-term health. Another market, for example, is Germany. They have one of the oldest populations in Europe. And when you think about that, you start seeing GLP-1s, again, not about weight, but about the benefit of having less inflammation on the brain, right? There's studies showing that it could actually impact Alzheimer's. Like, wow, I'm so happy I'm taking this drug now. And also, less issues on your joints. When you have less weight to carry around, the elderly can live longer lives, more fulfilling. So that's what I'm really excited about, but I think society has to be looked at market by market, not just from an America first standpoint that we see today.
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting point that, as you introduce any new technology, including GLP-1s, it sort of becomes a reflection of cultural priorities. And I think, Sona, you had a really nice analogy for a technological comparison to the rollout of GLP-1s.
Yeah, I've heard GLP-1s compared to as like the rollout of the iPhone, right? And this idea that like it starts off as something that's super expensive. We don't really know what it's going to do for us. We just know it's going to be big. And then you start to see adoption grow as use cases. And I think that's what we're talking about today is like how the use cases for culture are going to diversify. And so you almost see it growing in that way where it's like, okay, we know that this thing is big, it's important. We think that everyone should have access to it. Now the question is, how does that happen over time?
Yeah, fantastic. And building on that, so Jenny spoke to the fact that clearly GLP-1s are having influence far beyond just weight loss. Can you speak a little bit to their impact on general healthy lifestyles and modern lifestyles, and how at the YMCA, where you're obviously delivering physical, mental, social health services for millions of people, how are you thinking about GLP-1s?
Yeah, so I have kind of three buckets in how I look at it, right? The first is pretty obvious, which is, okay, if people are losing weight rapidly, we've got to make sure that they're able to pay attention to sort of muscle retention. We've got to make sure that they're able to pay attention to bone health and bone density. So I think like the obvious solution number one is like, okay, we will be rolling out strength training programs specifically for people on GLP-1s. But that almost feels like a marketing spin on an existing product, right? I think like the second level where you double click a little bit and it gets interesting is really similar to what Jenny was saying, which is like, okay, now you've suddenly cut out food noise. So how can we support people with programming that helps them think about nutrition in a way that maybe they haven't had the capacity to think about it before, right? So if you're eating a pad thai every day, like what might it look like for us to design a service for you where we can sort of help you understand how to get more nutrition into that, right? And I think that's a really exciting place. The third that I think is less obvious is, I think what you were saying at the top, which was like, okay, there's all these different applications to GLP-1s. So what happens if people start drinking less because they're on a GLP-1? Well, then do we start thinking about keeping our hours open later because folks are going to need a new place to gather outside of the bar where they want to be social? So do we introduce evening rock climbing? Do we introduce, like AR, VR plus sports and have that be a place where people can sort of build these new routines and sort of find, communal gathering places? So sky's the limit, right? But what is really fun to think about is like, okay, how do we converge all of these technologies and the shift in consumer behavior to redefine business models, right? So it's exciting.
I love that, and I think it's fascinating to think about, how the widespread adoption of GLP-1s, to your point, will open up more time, more leisure pursuits, more passions. It will change routines, weekly cadences, and transform the way that we go about our lives day to day.
Yeah, and the thing that I've been thinking a lot about as well is like, okay, well, also people are going to start to feel different in their bodies, right? And so do you start to have more people that were walking that never walked before, or feel more comfortable moving that had never felt before? That was something we saw a lot at Athleta, which was that people flocked to Athleta because we had size inclusive product, right? So people felt like, okay, I can feel attractive while wearing these clothes and still move. And you'd be amazed at how much that impacts whether you're willing to be physically active, is how you look and how you feel, right?
Physically intimate. We're also tracking friskiness and intimacy as part of this, which feels very adjacent. But if you think about people feeling more confident in their body, then relationships, dating, it's taking on a whole new world of opportunity as well.
And thank you, Jenny, because you talk about what we're tracking, and I think you're doing some fascinating market monitoring work. You're really diving into these sort of real-time conversations with GLP-1 users, and that's part of an offering that you mentioned up top, which is this very unique GLP-1 consultancy, which we're both part of. I wonder if you could speak to the audience a little bit about what that offering is and how you're helping different clients kind of navigate this massive market transformation.
Cool. So who here has ever heard of a GLP-1 consultancy? Right. It hadn't existed before Havas came up with it. And about a year ago, we saw the shift that was happening in the market, not just to individuals like me who are on a health journey, but not just to pharma either, which is a lot of our clients, but this broader vector, sector-wide impact that we were just amazed by. We had this idea that every single brand, and every one of you here today, I can confidently say, needs to think about from a business sense what your GLP-1 strategy is. And what we set up was a consultancy that really focused on risk mitigation as the market changes. We're looking at opportunity identification, and we're looking at business transformation strategies that are all based on the intersection of consumer behavior, or the communities, the market, and the businesses that are entering into it, and the science in real time. So that's something that I've been keeping a pulse on through data intelligence that we've been looking on globally.
And there are so many fascinating kind of initial responses to this transformation from all sorts of sectors. It's not obviously just a healthcare question, it's food and beverage, it's travel, hospitality, lifestyle industries across the board. Jenny, what are some of the most kind of interesting market responses you're seeing, or what are you seeing in terms of how industry is responding to GLP-1s?
I'll answer that two different ways, because interesting, I love that Burberry had an Ozempic fashion line on the runway last year. I think that's just so cool to come up with like fashion intersection of GLP-1s. I also love that there was an Ozempic costume you could get. I think Lizzo, if there are any fans, was able to wear one. And I just think that that whole pop cultural iconic nature of a drug is fascinating. But from a realistic standpoint, what are we seeing in terms of market movers? First and foremost, we're seeing new technologies pop up to solve the needs that the brands have not solved. Things like shortage tracking, getting access, symptom management. No one's solving it for them, and there are a lot of these unmet needs in the market. Second, I don't know if anyone is a faux Ozempic user here. I'm supportive of any kind of medicine or vitamins that you take, but faux Ozempic is this whole phenomenon. Like Kourtney Kardashian has launched an Ozempic-like drug. Now, it's not really a drug. It is a natural vitamin that you can take, but it's branded as Ozempic, right? It's a Let Me GLP-1 gummy. And I find that fascinating just to track the copycats and creating more confusion, but more mass appeal in the market. And then the third thing that I think is really interesting to observe are the early mover big brands that have started to not necessarily innovate, but I would say curate the market. So you see Equinox, they have a fitness plan for GLP-1 users on their journey, although you're gonna have to do more to get me back into the gym if I'm just losing weight. The second one I thought was fascinating is DNC, a drug company or vitamin company. They have a whole curation of the aisles there where you can actually go in and find your GLP-1 needs head to toe. And then the last one is obviously Nestle. Nestle's taking big swings. They haven't necessarily innovated new products initially. There's a caveat there, but they did rebrand a lot of products or put their products together in a way that was GLP-1 friendly. Actually, just 2 weeks back, I think early December, I don't know what day it is today, they launched a new product from Boost. I don't know if anyone remembers the Boost weight loss shakes or meal replacements. I also did those in my younger years. But they launched one called a pre-hunger shot. Shot is funny because it's a play on words, but really it's just a really small protein drink that actually activates or tries to activate your own GLP-1 production. So if you're on a GLP-1, you can also get an additional boost by drinking a Boost GLP-1 shot.
Fascinating, and I love that framing of kind of we're in this sort of the era of curation today, but I think moving forward we're going to see companies really step out to market with whole new propositions and kind of offering as the market expands, and we'll be watching that closely. Jenny, we spoke a little bit to confusion in the market with Ozempic and other sorts of things. Kevin, I think that takes us nicely as a tee up to talking about a really, really interesting initiative that you've been collaborating with myself and our partners at Havas on, which is a science-backed, creator-led content series called Shapeshifting, which really sort of speaks to the market and some of the misinformation that is out there about GLP-1s. I wonder if you could tell the audience a little about this really exciting project.
Yeah, so we were really excited to be a part of this for a number of reasons. One, we knew how much conversation was happening online about Ozempic and other GLP-1s. It is, as we've talked about, it has kind of permeated pop culture. The conversation around it has far outpaced the availability, the access, all these other things, and so it's piqued so much curiosity And we felt that there was an opportunity and a need to put out science-backed information that educates. It's not pro or against. It's a platform that we wanted to build like a creator would build and release content across social platforms, YouTube in particular, to be able to talk about how these drugs work, side effects, all sorts of interesting facets to help start a conversation and to build a platform and a place that can be a conversation amongst the community and can evolve as the science develops. And we started launching the programming just a few weeks ago. It's been off to a tremendous start, and we're really excited to continue to tell more stories, to explore different areas of the field as it develops.
I think it's so important. I can attest to some of this very sensational content that I've seen online around this topic, and I think it's wonderful that you're filling that gap with truly science-backed and data-backed high production value storytelling in this market. At the top of the panel, I spoke to the fact that clearly there are a lot of unknowns when it comes to how GLP-1s are going to play out and roll out across society. And I think here at CES, what's amazing about this conference is that we get a glimpse into the future, but at the same time, it's often quite a lot of very sort of bold predictions made about where the future will go. And I think for us and many of us on the panel here, we probably prefer a little bit more of a foresight-based approach. You know, how do we contextualize the present, but plan for a whole range of different scenarios? So Jenny, I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit. High level, what are some of the different scenarios that we might see in terms of how GLP-1s will be adopted in society and culture?
So I'll go through this pretty quickly. I think really baseline level, we can definitely expect that the indications around GLP-1s to expand. I think some of the more interesting ones that we're looking at, and again, don't have the science to back any of this up just yet, but really early indications around impulse control, desire, things like compulsive behaviors, addiction, drinking. There's some early behaviors there that start to really think about how do consumers not just think about their weight, but how do they behave when it comes to shopping or needing more. So baseline, definitely think it's going to expand and continue along that way. Probable future, it's likely to go more mass. We're likely to see more adoption. We'll fix the access problems. We are working on fixing the shortage problems, right? Factories are being built. It's being pumped back into the US and globally. So I do think we'll resolve that. And I also think it'll become preventative and more always on. So for example, we all probably took Flintstone gummies growing up daily. Like what if it was a family ritual to take something that was a light GLP-1 dose that was more preventative in nature to benefit everyone in the household? Now, last one is far, far flung future, and don't boo me off the stage, but this might get a little bit weird. I have been tracking for some conversations around if we are all eating less, could GLP-1s create a more sustainable food supply system globally? Can we reallocate the food that Americans potentially aren't eating as much of? Thought that was fascinating. And also parts of the internet are starting to talk about if thinness is so attainable to all of us, right? Thinness becomes mass. Do we see a return back to more chubby silhouettes or, as an aspirational state? So I think it's going to be constantly moving, but I'm excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, constantly shape-shifting and really interesting to see, as you say, the impact long-term on beauty ideals and norms and aspirations and impact on the food supply. I think one of the things that really fascinated me about the adoption of GLP-1s, and you spoke to a little bit, Jenny, was that this was probably the first drug in history where consumer pull really massively outstripped marketing push in terms of a major drug going to market. There is a pharmaceutical playbook, physician engagement, TV ads like the ones you've all seen with lots of disclaimers, but in this instance, it was very ground up, it was very social driven, there was a huge amount of kind of grassroots conversation and appetite and demand. It's really sort of flipped the script in terms of how drugs go to market. And I think, Kevin, I'd love to hear from you a little bit in terms of, creators really felt like they had an outsized role in propelling this transformation and this change in culture. Can you speak a little bit about the role of creators and how they've been so important in this dialogue?
Yeah, I think it's becoming more and more apparent that creators and online conversation those recommendations are having an impact in consumer behavior across the board. I think it was probably less evident that would, or obvious that would be the case when it comes to healthcare decisions and medical advice. But especially as platform algorithms shift and they're getting better and better at meeting audiences based on where they're currently at. So content is being fed to them based on their previous watch history and based on things that are happening in their current day-to-day lives. We're seeing that influence spread to farther reaches than recommending a VPN or a direct-to-consumer product. And what's really fascinating is that there was actually an interesting stat that we came across that over 74% of people are more likely to request a treatment from a medical provider if they were recommended to it by an influencer, which is a mind-blowing stat, but it speaks to the power of that relationship that creators have with their audience and a trust that is inherent when you feel like you have a direct personal relationship with someone, as the creators and their audiences do. And so with that knowledge, we felt, and I know that Havas felt, that it was really important to start speaking to communities through the voices of creators. And I'm hopeful that more of those conversations are going to be occurring with up-to-date scientific backed information so that people can go into these decisions with open eyes.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. Really excited to see the rollout of this content series and this platform that you've created. I think the third major content installment will be going live this week on YouTube. So if you want to learn more about this fascinating topic, I highly recommend that you tune in and pay attention to this amazing initiative. But Kevin, you mentioned communities there, the creator communities. Clearly GLP-1s are impacting a huge cross-section of different audiences and communities. Jenny, I know you've been spending a ton of time sleuthing your way around the internet, doing market monitoring, listening into the real needs and experiences and journeys of GLP-1 users and communities. I wonder if you could share with this audience some of the things that really have popped and stood out for you, and perhaps what are some of maybe the myths about the GLP-1 experience that we might bust here today on the stage?
I do have to say, you do make it seem like my job is to sit on TikTok and Netflix, so I do more than that, and I promise there's data involved. But I'm fascinated by the community, and I think this is really what's going to wrap up my takeaways for today. One of the biggest things is that there's a conversation around the haves and have-nots, obviously, but it goes further than that. It's the people who have struggled with weight versus the media, who maybe have what I called metabolically blessed, versus those that have always struggled with this. There's two different mindsets there, right? To the community, GLP-1s are a blessing to something they never thought was actually going to be achievable to reach their goals. We also know that the celebrities are not the consumer. I think this was fascinating when I found this out. People in Brooklyn and LA only make up 1% of the population on GLP-1s. Everything else is coming from middle America. It's rural, it's suburban, it is people that shop at Walmart, it is people that are everyday individuals. And I find that fascinating because the media is telling a story around the Kardashians, like to mention them twice in one session. And one great example is that the media is making you feel scared of Ozempic face, right? Like that is like, oh my God, you could have Ozempic face if you lose weight. Mind you, the community is saying, thanks for noticing. I wanted to achieve this. And there's a fine line there, but there's a real difference when you look at that. Some other really interesting trends that I've been watching and observing is injection day rituals, right? How do they behave around the injections themselves? Injection syncing. So they're actually taking couples and saying, we're going to do injections on the same day, or friends, so you can go on the journey together. People are actually skipping meals for the holidays, or skipping injections so they can indulge on the holidays. So I know I gained weight over the holidays because I skipped a dose or two, which meant I could eat my weight in food again. The drug was no longer there working on me. And I just think overall it's fascinating when you search, let's say, Facebook, there are hundreds and hundreds of communities out there for GLP-1 users. But it's not, hey, join this GLP-1 community. It's, hey, you're 60 years old, you're male, you're on Ozempic, and you like working out, join this community. You're a black woman over the age of 40 on Wegovy, this community is for you. It's gotten so specific. I can't get into half of them, so we're going to need another approach there. But the overall takeaway for me, it's we're seeing the first time people have ever looked forward towards an injection. I don't know about you guys, if you're all looking forward to going to that next shot, the next vaccine, but people are. Every week they think injection day is the most exciting part of their week because that's the day they feel most in control of themselves.
It's really fascinating. You spoke to some of the imbalances perhaps that exist, disconnects between perhaps the media discourse around GLP-1s and the lived experience of using them day to day. And it feels like imbalances and perhaps sort of inequities are just an inevitable part of this conversation and what we'll be paying attention to moving forward. So I know you've done through your career a lot of work in the health equity space, and I think obviously early on one of the biggest conversations around GLP-1s was just simply one of access. Who gets this drug and who doesn't? Can you speak a little bit to how GLP-1s are playing into this very uniquely challenged US health system that we have and the inevitable politicization, actually, that we're also seeing of GLP-1 drugs?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's sort of what I said at the top, which is it all comes back to this question on who can afford to be healthy, or in this context, who can afford to be thin, right? And so I do think it's similar to any new technology, which is sort of like follow consumer behavior and follow the money. I think that the math is eventually going to math, where healthcare, where insurers and kind of the entire healthcare industrial complex starts to realize just the dramatic reduction in cost by prescribing GLP-1s to those who need them. So I do think that over time, while it will be in fits and jerks, as we've sort of seen like in the last month or so, I think Michigan, Medicare stopped paying for GLP-1s sort of all of a sudden. I think the city of New York stopped paying all of a sudden for its employees, or it's phasing out the payment of GLP-1s for its employees. So you're going to see sort of fits and jerks because the costs are so high at the onset. But I think the evidence thus far has been pretty clear that this will dramatically reduce healthcare costs. And so with that, it's my hope that we will start to see access be rolled out to everyone who needs it in an equitable way, although things just take, I think, longer than we want them to. And we're obviously entering like a pretty, who knows what's going to happen, I think, in terms of policy. The other sort of side of this, I don't think that GLP-1s abdicate us from the responsibility of tackling big food, right? And I think that is like a fight that is concurrently happening. And it's not just, I think, maybe like the RFK Juniors, it's right, it's these organizations like Food Fight, which have been fighting for this for years, and starting to change nutrition labeling, starting to change sort of how we think about what we allow in our food system. So I think all of those things are going to happen concurrently, and ideally we're going to end up with, to go back to that iPhone analogy, we're going to end up with a smartphone in everyone's pocket, right? So anyone who needs it will have it. It's just a matter of like how we're going to get there.
I think I love that. I love that optimistic take. As you say, there's mixed messages coming out of the incoming administration. There's a lot of complexity to that, but I think the potential for GLP-1s to actually reduce overall health inequities on the back of things like obesity, which have historically really affected low-income communities and people of color, I think is really exciting.
Yeah, and I think we're in an era of multiple truths being true at the same time, right? And that just is how it is, and so that, I think, is how this dialogue is going to move forward. And yeah, I think that we're finally in an era, too, where we have to address the systemic inequities and who hasn't had access and who should, and I think that'll happen.
Fantastic. Well, we look forward to that. So we're getting close to wrap-up time here. I should say that this is obviously a ginormous topic, far more than we could ever cover in 40 minutes. We'd be delighted to kind of carry on the conversation with anybody here in the audience who'd like to know more about the work that we're doing in this space, the additional programming on this topic that we have going here at CES and far beyond. But to wrap this up, I'd love to hear from each of our panelists. In this fast-changing landscape, this incredible transformation, what will you be watching and paying attention to most in this year to come? And what piece of advice would you give to the brand and business leaders in the audience here who are really thinking about how do I navigate this incredible revolution?
So I'll have you to kick us off. I think at the risk of sounding redundant, the thing I'll be watching most is just sort of policy change. So healthcare policy change, and what does the reimbursement landscape look like for these drugs over the next year plus, as well as policy shifts on how we interact with food and the food system, I think are two huge things to be looking out for. In terms of advice, I think it kind of goes back to this community lesson, right? And I think Weight Watchers is a great example. Athleta also a great example. When you have a business that has been built on community, where it's like community at the root of your business, you've got to make sure that you're being careful about how you introduce and drive new technology. I think like Weight Watchers is a great example where I think like super smart business move for them to get into GLP-1s and pair GLP-1s with this historic sort of behavior change program. But what you also had were folks who had been on the program for 30 or 40 years with this huge backlash saying like, wait a second, I've done the work for 30 or 40 years and now you're telling me to take this drug, like this is BS, right? And kind of saw the same thing happen with Athleta as they move through like sizing of product. And so but I think the big lesson and the thing to be careful about is like, if you have community at the root of your brand, which so many brands do now, make sure that you're taking them along on the journey and being kind of methodical so that it doesn't feel like media is controlling sort of how you run your business.
Love that, Sana. Thank you.
So I'm on the lookout, and I'm really interested in how GLP-1s are going to affect children. So current indications go as young as 10 years old, and there are things in the pipeline for 6-year-olds. I am a mother of a 2-year-old, and I'm fascinated to think about if she were to struggle with any health condition or obesity, would she be able to grow up as a teenager feeling excited to go to the beach? I'm not sure where my values would lie on this just yet, but I'm fascinated to see the conversation. It's still been very taboo, and you don't hear anyone talking about it beyond scientists. And then my advice to all of you is, don't ignore this, don't sit it out. Clearly, if you're listening or if you're in the room with us today, you're thinking this way already. But there's room for the big players, there's room for the startups. We need a whole ecosystem of brands and businesses to be working together to actually create something that is a positive in the world. GLP-1s to me are maybe the most optimistic new technology I've seen out there in decades. So we can all contribute to a better life moving forward with them.
I think what I'm kind of most interested to see and looking out for is how much more from a conversation standpoint you're going to see higher profile individuals talking about their experiences, their true experiences. Obviously there's transformation photos and things of that nature, but talking about the real experience going through it, some of the things that were touched on more in kind of these individual communities that are going through it together, but how is that information going to be spread so that there can be more education about what that looks like for people more broadly. And I think my advice would be similar in terms of, you know, for a brand to realize that while it might not be immediately evident how it could impact your business, to think creatively around some of these maybe far-flung futures that might seem distant today, but this is moving so quickly that future is going to be here before you know it, and to be able to prepare for how that could positively impact your business. And I think participating in that, even in this early stage of you being here today, I think is the first step.
Brilliant. Love that as the closing thought. The future is now, so get ready. Thank you all very, very much for joining us here for this conversation. It was an absolute thrill and privilege to be able to have this fascinating conversation. Look forward to hopefully connecting with many of you to carry on the discussion. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining.
Well. That was extremely interesting. Hi, Brandy. Hi, everybody. Never heard of this before, so I'm gonna have to analyze, to make research, analyze, and think about this whole thing. I almost did not show it to you because there's some keynotes that I don't care about, like sports and video games. I didn't care about that, so I skip over this. When I saw pharmaceutical thingy thing, I almost jumped over it. It did the GLP thingy thing. I didn't know what it was, so that's why I wanted to listen to it, what it was. Yeah, I did. Bonjour tout le monde. Je vous ai quasiment pas montré ce keynote-là parce que je savais pas c'était quoi. Les affaires de pharmaceutical, je veux rien savoir de ça. Il y a comme des keynotes sur les sports, sur les jeux vidéo. Je vais pas vous montrer ça parce que pour moi, ça m'intéresse pas. Pas important pour moi. Mais je suis contente que je l'ai faite. Je sais pas c'est quoi. Je vais falloir que j'analyse, je fasse de la recherche, j'analyse ça, puis que je représente, que je fasse une opinion sur cette histoire-là. Fait que, very interesting. Très intéressant. Bon, je reviens dans 5 minutes avec un autre keynote. Randy, I'll come back in 5 with another keynote. See you then.